What do you have for me today, Catherine?
I want to talk about writing sequels, or maybe on a broader level, writing in series or writing a book that is not solely a standalone book. We did have an episode a while back with, I believe it was with Alethea, where we talked about writing a sequel, but I feel like there's a lot you can cover when you're talking about that craft of moving from one book to two books or to three books, or crafting maybe even a series that you kind of know from the beginning. So, okay. So, first to start us off, I'm just going to say, how is it different to writing a sequel from writing a first book? That was a very awkwardly worded question. Writing a sequel, how is it different from writing a first book or from writing a standalone? And you have both. So, in your experience or
Mm-hmm.
in your editing experience or your coaching experience, how is that different?
Yeah, so I think if if you go into it knowing that you're writing a series, then you know from the beginning that you're going to be plotting multiple books, right?
Hmm.
So you can think about that from the very beginning. Whereas if you write a book that you intend to be a standalone or you don't have plans for as a series, and then it does well, or you fall in love with the supporting character or whatever, then you might do a sequel, and that we could make a distinction that might be useful between
Yeah.
writing a series and writing a sequel, with the
Hmm.
series being the thing you know from the beginning. So you start conceiving of it as
Hmm.
multiple books in one world with a fixed set of primary characters, right? Whereas a sequel, you maybe have no intention of it, at least not when you start. It might not be the same protagonist or the same rules, so you've got more liberty to change things. Like my current work in progress, just to give a quick example, started as one book. It's so big, I think I'm going to make it a duology, so it'll still be one story, but
Nice.
in two books, right? And then my protagonist has a daughter, and it's kind of in the back of my mind that that might be a great sequel. And my current protagonist wouldn't even need to be in that book. She could have aged out,
Right.
right? So it would be a sequel, but the protagonist would be the daughter who's a young child in this book, and so has a minimal role. You know, she's
Right.
dependent, she's not a decision maker, she doesn't have her own storyline. So that's a great example of a sequel, whereas like Scott Hall books, I knew from the beginning that I wanted to write a series. And so
Right.
then I'm thinking structurally in a different way. And I've got to think, what is my protagonist's journey that she's going on over the course of multiple books? The setting and supporting characters, right? That's going to span multiple books. Not that supporting characters can't come and go. But then what about the plot? Do I want to have a linked plot like you
Right.
see in a lot of adventure stories or fantasy stories where you know each book has its own plot, but over the course of the series they add up to be underneath the umbrella of one bigger plot, or
Hmm.
standalone plots, which you get in a lot of mysteries, which you get in Skog, where each book could be read alone because the
Hmm.
mystery is a self-contained thing. And the umbrella arc is really the character arc and the world building and such.
Yes.
So,
Yes. You just
hmm
covered a lot of ground.
oh,
All the
good.
things to unpack. Yes. Oh, I love the idea of a duology. Okay, I want to go back to that first because I feel like that's something we haven't talked a lot about is when your story gets too big and you decide to split it because you have to still have a satisfying arc and ending in the first book. It's not like you just hit the middle of act two and say, the end, start over, how are you crafting that to where you've now written something that you're like, this is too big for one book? How are you now changing that craft of the arc in order to make it a duology?
Well, I'm lucky because it's kind of baked into my story. This book
Hmm.
is epic and it's got four. main settings already. And it just works out very tidily that I can have kind of well, actually 4 or 5 settings, but the first three make one book in a very neat way that take my protagonist, Evelyn, from her home setting to an institutional school setting to a halfway house setting. And then when
Mm,
she leaves that world and sets off independent of any of those prior influences as a real adult with adult agency and actually being responsible for someone else, right? That's a great place to put that divider. So I got lucky, but I think if someone were in that position of saying, I've got this epic book, it's growing into a monster, I know it's going to stay epic, even without any extraneous elements, even without being a bloated story. I think I want to make it a duology. Then I would say look for a transition point toward the middle where you can study what you've already got in terms of plot and character and say, this is a natural breaking point. And importantly, book one can have its own climax and resolution,
right.
right? So I think in my case, although I haven't written that far yet, um, I've outlined and I've done a lot, but I haven't written through in such a way that I can say with certainty, here it is, it's done. But in my case, I can say, okay, this jump from some kind of institutional life to independent life,
Right.
that makes sense. And the thing that is her decision-making point before she makes that leap, that works. I can have a climax there that will satisfy readers of book one, even if they never read book two and they just want to think, okay, that was girls in institutions in the 1920s in America.
Hmm.
I'm satisfied. So look for those criteria. Can I have a climax and a resolution without forcing it with some sort of natural break so that the transition makes sense? Just like, when you've got a scene break, there's white space. We have to jump it. The reader has to jump that white space. It's little. You're hopping
Hmm.
over a puddle. You get a chapter break. You've got to cross a creek. You might need a few stepping stones or a little footbridge. You've got an act break. It's bigger. You get that book break where you've got to actually go out, maybe wait for the second book to be published, go out and make that decision, make that purchase, invest in reading it. That's a really big break. So definitely make it worth your readers' while to complete the first book. Don't just leave them hanging.
Yeah. Yeah. We are not very happy people when we get cliffhangers. I think both
Right.
you
Or
and I agree on that one. We are not cliffhanger people. Like, don't do it to us.
right. And you hear sometimes about those trilogies where someone says the trilogy was great, but book two, all that did was fill in the middle between book one and book
Yes.
three. Like,
Hmm.
okay, really? Should that have been its own book?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, knowing that structure has to be there for every single book. We need to have that satisfying ending. And I want to talk about that with not just a series like a duology like you're talking about, but also like a series where you have a very I guess it's like a layer of stories within a larger narrative structure, right? Those are those the Harry Potter series, things where you have a very big arc, you're fitting into. And we have satisfying endings in every book, right? So how do
Hmm.
we handle an end hook at the end of the book where you grab the readers and they say, "Oh, I can't wait for the next one to come out. Oh, I need to know what happens next," without ruining that satisfying ending of the book, right?
Hmm.
So there's that tricky
Yeah.
situation there.
Yeah. So I think with Harry Potter, Rowling just did it very well because we invested in Harry and his friends. We invested in the world of
Hmm.
Hogwarts. As the stakes increased and things got bigger and broader, we invested in the magic world versus the mundane world. So all of those things keep us wanting to come back and getting more. So then the first thing I would say is make sure your readers have a good reason to invest, not just in your protagonist, right? Storytelling is much more complex than our character arcs and our plot arcs make it seem at
Hmm.
first glance. The second thing you can do is leave something open-ended that is not your main plot. So
Hmm.
supporting characters and subplots do a lot of work for us. So like at the end of Murder in Skog Hall, the murder mystery is all wrapped up. It's got a bow on it. Everything is resolved, right? But Jess and Beckett, her new boyfriend, come out of a shop at the end of the book, and parking his truck across the street is her first love interest from when she moved to Skog Hall, who caused all kinds of trouble, right? And there's a little bit of rivalry. So then a reader who cares, who has invested in Jess and her character arc and her relationships with supporting characters, is going to see Tyler rolling up and go, uh-oh, what's going to happen there? So they can safely bet that in book two, I'm going to give them more of that. I'll give them a new mystery, new murder thriller stuff, but a continuation of the subplots with the supporting characters. So, emotional investment and also some non-critical plot or subplot element that can carry over into the next book.
I'm just looking at my notes. I wrote down questions because I'm in the middle of this right now myself. I'm pretty happy with where my book one is. I have a series plotted out. I'm starting to work on plotting book two. So this is all very like timely for me. So this is my question. Anybody else who has questions, you're welcome to join me. Okay, so I talked about layering stories within a larger narrative series. I feel like there's maybe three different kinds of series, and you already touched on this a little bit. Like there's the one that has the overall narrative arc where you're like, okay, I'm in this for the long haul. I understand that this entire plot arc is not going to be ended in book one. Maybe I understand already from the beginning I might be 3 or 4 or 5 books deep by the time I'm done with this story. Cool. Then I feel like there's that kind of intermediate layer where it's like this could continue and I could keep going on this journey, maybe similarly to like murder mysteries and things like that, where it's like I'm following the protagonist, but maybe there's not a huge overarching plot. And I called those like a series of interlocking stories, right? So they're all locked together. We're there for the protagonist. I want to talk about a series of standalone books. So it's like, I think the romance genre does this a lot where it's like you'll completely skip over, you'll jump into side character, right, from book one that all of a sudden is the protagonist. And you may have some pieces that stay the same, but you've completely jumped ship into a completely different story. So setting might stay the same, friend group might stay the same. You might see the protagonist from the
Mm-hmm.
previous book. But can you talk about maybe some elements of standalone series that is different than like a series of interlocking or layered books that where you maybe are trying different characters or trying different plot lines and still managing to keep the reader?
Yeah, so I haven't written that kind of a series, but I think with that, just like the series where the plots are independent of each other, but you have character arcs, it's like that, but instead of leaning into the character arc and the subplots with supporting characters, you're leaning into setting and theme. So if you've got, you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned romances, you've got a group of best friends and each one gets a book and they all live in the same town or whatever unifies them. And so then why are readers going to come back? I mean, we might come back because we find that friend group so enchanting, but if friend two or three takes us on an entirely different kind of journey than the prior ones, we're probably going to disconnect. If you've got
Mm-hmm.
light romantic comedies for a couple of books, and then the third one, the protagonist falls in love just as she gets cancer, and then it's, you know, like love versus mortality. It's a different world. So even though you might be in the same setting with the same characters, you just threw the reader a curveball.
Right.
So with that sort of series, you're going to want to probably think in advance, who are these characters? We need to be careful with that type of character building because in book one, you've got your protagonist, right? And you've got two or three um, first tier supporting characters who are going to trade and become protagonists in later books. So we need them to be prominent enough in each other's books that we get to know them, especially the one who's coming up
Mm-hmm.
next, right? Who you're passing the baton to, but not so prominent that they steal the show or that the main protagonist isn't as interesting or right. So then instead of thinking as much about plotting the series, I would be putting some extra time into thinking about character arcs for each of those books and who's got what role in the broader sense
Mm-hmm.
and who's got what role in relationship to each other. So then, as character B becomes the protagonist and character A drops back, I'm thinking, what are C and D doing? How is their friendship different with B than it was with A? Right.
Yeah,
So it's a type of plotting, but it's very character focused plotting with that series in mind.
definitely. Okay. So with building a character for a series, you mentioned, focusing on those different characters in that kind of standalone series. But when you're crafting a series around a character like Jess in Murder and Skull Call, is there a different consideration you have in terms of her character arc or her flaws or the way that she's growing based on the fact that she's going to be in a series rather than just one book that you're dealing with?
Yeah, so I think um, with with a character like Jess, you want to have room for growth over the series, whereas with a character like Sherlock Holmes or Miss Marple or
Right.
Poirot or any of those, you don't really need to see them grow. We don't really need Miss Marple to come out of her parlor and stop serving tea. She can
Hmm.
keep doing that to the end of days, and we're happy as long as she solves a mystery. So when you think about a character's arc over multiple books instead of one book, it's going to tie in to plot and subplots. Everything does, right?
Right.
So character traits come in the form of skills and qualities. So Jess comes into the story with a set of qualities, her inherent personality, quirks, and history, and, all the stuff that makes her who she is. But then as she goes through the series, she's going to be learning and developing things. So I can tell you at the opening of book one, she wasn't at all psychic. She bought a haunted house. So over the course of several books, she's got to figure out what it means for her to be able to see and communicate with the dead. So those are skills that she's developing, right, as a character trait, and something that will evolve her because our experiences shape who we become down the road. She also, in the second book, we get a little more crime thriller, the sheriff's investigators involved. And so she goes to a firing range, she buys a gun, right? So thinking in terms of a series, think about escalation through your plots. And
Hmm.
do you want your books to be sort of one and done like the Agatha Christie's or right, where you don't necessarily need to see an escalation book to book to book. You just need each mystery to be interesting and contained
Right.
and to keep readers happy. Whereas if you get into something like a Harry Potter, then book two is more intense than book one, and so on to the big climax. So there we really have a 7 book plot arc,
Hmm.
you know? And I think if I hit a book where I feel like I've taken Jess as far as she can go, I would be done with her.
Right. Hmm.
Right. So then maybe it's not about evolution so much of her as a character, but about those relationships and supporting characters, which, and let me back up and say, that's something else I'm thinking about along the way besides character traits. Like, by book two, she's already on her second love interest in the series because number one was just a rebounder. He's quick and
Oh.
yeah. I'm not trying to disparage Jess here. I'm just, such is life. Right. So then uh do I want romantic relationships to feature into the stories? To what degree is that important to her character, to the subplot, to the town? Maybe she and Beckett the Potter can just kind of settle in for a book or two or three. And then when I need to mix things up again, I change that. So as writers, we've got tools at our disposal. We can look at character setting, those traits, the skills that they develop and adapt along the way. And then subplots, what kind of changes can we throw into the mix for our characters as we work our way through the series? And all of that should work to complicate our main plots, right? And as you know, complications can be positive or negative. So we
Hmm.
can have a very good thing in our lives, but it's making something else tricky, more complex, more nuanced, or whatever.
Hmm.
So, looking at all of those elements I just touched on and asking, how does this help me keep advancing my story, raising stakes and tension, and engaging my reader? That's what we want to do.
Absolutely.